So the Nigerian Civil Society Situation Room, a coalition of civil society organizations working to support credible, transparent, and inclusive elections in Nigeria, deployed observers across the 16 local government areas of Ekiti State to observe the governorship election held on Saturday, 20th June 2026. Our observation methodology. Situation Room's observation of 2026 Ekiti governorship election combined the deployment of accredited observers, election observers to polling units, and the use of citizens observer reporting through the Situation Room election accountability tracker SIT mobile and web application. In addition, the Situation Room received reports from its partner network deploying observers like the Action Aid Nigeria, Claim Foundation, Center LSD, and the Kimber Development Initiative, the KDI. The Situation Room partners deployed totaling over 200 accredited observers across the states and the local government. In addition to this statement, Situation Room had issued earlier on a preliminary statement and an interim statement based on reports received from accredited observers and verified citizens observer through the SIT app. Situation Room makes the following observation. General assessment of the election. Situation Room notes that the Ekiti governorship election was conducted in a generally peaceful atmosphere across most parts of the states. Voters were able to exercise their franchise without widespread disruption. While election officials and security agencies largely discharged their responsibility in accordance with established procedures. The election represents another important opportunity for democratic consolidation in Nigeria and demonstrates the continued commitment of citizens to democratic participation despite prevailing concerns about our voter turnout and public confidence in electoral institutions. Election administration and turnout. Situation Room notes that the Ekiti State governorship election was conducted in a largely peaceful atmosphere across the state. Reports received from accredited observers and citizens observers through the SIT app indicated that election officials and materials arrived on time in a majority of the polling units observed between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. Following deployment, polls commenced early in approximately 92% of polling units observed. However, delays in the commencement of voting were reported in some locations due to late deployment of officials and logistical challenges, specifically in St. George's Primary School, Ijibo, Ekiti, and St. Thomas Primary School, Irona, Ekiti. Election officials generally followed established procedures for accreditation and voting, contributing to an orderly process in the majority of the polling units observed. Observers reported steady voter participation during the early hours of the voting, although turnout varied across local government areas. While the turnout exceeded that recorded in some recent off-cycle election and the 2022 Ekiti State governorship election, it remains significantly lower than the state's voter registration and PVC collection figures. Functionality of the election technology. The bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, functioned satisfactorily in most of the observed locations. Nonetheless, isolated incidents of technical difficulties were recorded, resulting in temporary delays in voter accreditation and voting processes. In most places where the BVAS malfunctioned, it failed to authenticate voters, especially the elderly, using facial detection. Incidents of BVAS malfunction or delayed activation were also recorded in the following locations. St. Andrew's Primary School, Okeila Ward, PU07, Ekiti Local Government. Ward 09, PU08, Ayegunle Street, Ayekere, formerly Boyin Local Government. Ise Orun Local Government, Ward 003, PU003. 4. St. Michael's Primary School, Ekiti, where voting could not commence due to BVAS activation failure. And 5. St. Luke's African Primary School, Ayede South, Ilaji Ward, Oye Local Government, where accreditation was significantly delayed. As at 11 a.m., only 4 voters have been accredited until BVAS began functioning again after an hour later. Situation room further notes that the uploading of the polling units result to the INEC result viewing portal IRF progressed from about 4:30 p.m. when they first uploaded upload observed. Reports indicated that over 85% of polling units results had been uploaded by the evening of the election day. Security environment. The security situation remained generally peaceful in most parts of the state. Security personnel were visible at polling units and the election facilities observed. Situation room, however, revealed reports of isolated incidents requiring further verification and investigation by relevant authorities. Compliance with electoral procedures. Election officials largely adhere to prescribed voting procedures in observed polling units. Polling officials demonstrated familiarity with election guidelines, and voting was generally conducted in an orderly manner. However, there were inconsistencies between the number of political parties contained in INEC earlier communication. Printed ballot papers and results sheets. INEC earlier announced 14 political parties, but ballot paper reflected 19 political parties, while the result sheets reflected 15 political parties. Voters went ahead to vote for these parties despite not presenting any candidate for the election. Additional procedural concerns were also observed in the following. Ekiti West Local Government, Ward 5, PU03, where individuals without voter cards were reportedly allowed to vote upon verification of their names in the register. Ekiti Ward 07 PU019, the senior government official reportedly directed that all registered voters, including those absent, should be allowed to vote. Key concerns include polling units located in inaccessible buildings. Inclusion and accessibility. Situation room observe varying levels of accessibility for persons with disability, elderly voters, and nursing mothers. While some polling units made efforts to prioritize vulnerable voters, challenges relating to physical access and voting assistance were reported in certain locations. Situation room partner South Africa shows serious accessibility gaps affecting persons with disability and elderly voters in several locations, particularly in parts of Ekiti. Key concerns include polling units located in inaccessible buildings with staircases, voting cubicles placed in ways that undermine ballot secrecy, relocation of polling units without adequate voter communication, and limited availability of disability inclusive resources. Key concerns generally with regards to the election. Situation room notes with concern of the following. 1. Alleged incidents of voter inducement in some polling locations. Delays in the opening of polls in certain areas. Inconsistent adherence to electoral procedure in isolated polling units. The persistence of low voter turnout despite extensive voter education efforts. These issues underscore the need for continued improvement in electoral administration, enforcement of electoral laws, and civic engagement initiatives. Looking ahead, Osun 2026 and the general election 2027. A significant lesson from the Ekiti governorship election is the persistent challenge of voter apathy. Despite over 1 million registered voters and a PVC collection rate of 97.1%, only about 1/3 of eligible voters participated in the election. This trend raises important questions regarding citizen confidence in electoral processes, political parties, and governance outcome, and requires urgent attention from INEC, political actors, civil society organizations, and relevant government institutions. So, situation room makes the following recommendation. 1. INEC undertakes a comprehensive review of logistic and operational challenges encountered during the election before the next off-cycle election in Osun State. INEC should also be clear on its procedure for using the PVC during an election going forward. INEC should also ensure that the ballot paper carries the exact number of political parties presenting candidates for an election so as not to create confusion to the voters. Security agencies need to continue to strengthen mechanisms for preventing electoral offenses, including voter inducement and intimidations. Political parties should deepen internal democratic processes and promote issue-based campaigning. 4. The National Assembly, INEC, political parties, and civil society organizations should intensify efforts to address declining voter turnout and strengthen public confidence in our elections in general. Relevant authorities should investigate and prosecute electoral offenses in accordance with the law. Conclusion. The Nigerian civil society situation concludes as follows. Situation room commends the people of Ekiti State for their peaceful participation in the electoral processes and acknowledges the efforts of election officials, security agencies, and political parties, observers, the media, and other stakeholders involved. As Nigeria prepares for future elections, the lessons from the Ekiti governorship election should inform ongoing efforts to strengthen electoral integrity, democratic governance, and citizen participation. Thank you.